Tacky old woman, my daughter-in-law screamed, her voice slicing through the air like a whip. Glasses clattered to the floor as she slammed her hand against the dining table. My son didn't stop her, he nodded. A chair toppled, a plate shattered. The room spun in disbelief. She pointed at me with trembling rage. "You're bitter, you're nothing." My heart pounded, my breath caught, every eye in the room locked on me. Why would the woman I welcomed into my family humiliate me like this? And what terrible truth could silence the entire party in an instant? If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you, silently arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment saying Amen below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. I always imagined my retirement party would feel like a warm hug after a long winter. 37 years working as a senior accountant at Mitchell & Bray, day in, day out through mergers, recessions, restructurings, and 5 CEOs. I gave them more of myself than I gave to anyone else, including my own family. And in return, they threw me a party at the Scottsdale Country Club with linen tablecloths, hand-cut orchids, and a cake that spelled out, "Congratulations, Nora," in perfect cursive icing. It was supposed to be my moment, my closure, my thank you. Instead, I stood there frozen, like a statue in the middle of that chandelier-lit hall, as my daughter-in-law Brianna raised her voice loud enough for every silver spoon in the room to hear. "You're just bitter because my parents have money," she snapped, her manicured finger stabbing the air between us. "You've always been jealous of our lifestyle." There was a hush, a vacuum, the sound of gasps sucked inward, of waiters halting mid-pour. Even the band stopped tuning their instruments. And then, as if someone had cued him, my son Eric, the boy I raised alone after his father died, the boy I gave everything for, nodded in agreement. "It's true, Mom," he said. "You're not useful anymore. Maybe it's time you stopped trying to insert yourself into our lives." I don't remember dropping my wine glass, but I heard it hit the floor. It didn't shatter, it just rolled, elegantly, like it was trying not to embarrass me further. Not useful anymore. The words rang through me like church bells on a funeral day. I stared at my son, this man in a tailored navy suit who looked so polished and successful, so foreign. I remembered the time I ate peanut butter sandwiches for 2 months just to pay his private school tuition. I remembered sewing his Halloween costumes by hand when he was little. I remembered staying up through the night with a calculator in one hand and his college financial aid papers in the other. And now he stood there, arms crossed, nodding along as his wife tore me to pieces. Brianna wasn't finished. Her voice rose, sharp and theatrical. "It's embarrassing, Nora, how you try to keep up with us. You live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old car. You give us advice about money like you know what you're talking about. It's pathetic." And her laughter was brittle and mean, the kind of laughter that dares people to join in. I saw Mrs. Greaves from HR turn her eyes away, her cheeks turning pink. One of the junior partners whispered something to his wife, who looked at me with pity. Pity. That's when something inside me not broke, not snapped closed, like a book I'd been writing for too long. I took a breath, a long, slow one, and felt it settle inside me like a weight. Then I smiled, not the fake, pleasant smile I'd been wearing all evening. A real one, a quiet, sharp, knowing smile. "Well," I said, "since we're discussing money, I suppose now is as good a time as any." Brianna blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "The $2 million, I said calmly. "The loan I gave your parents 3 years ago." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She stumbled backward, grabbing Eric's arm. "What are you talking about?" Eric asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. I turned to face the crowd, the way she had just moments ago. You see, a few years ago, Brianna's parents Thomas and Linda Cole found themselves in a bit of financial trouble. Business debts, lawsuits, poor investments. They came to me, of all people, for help. I loaned them $2 million, at 5% interest, payable over 7 years. I paused. They made 6 months of payments. Then nothing. Brianna was whispering now, too stunned to speak clearly. You can't, that's not." "I can, and I did," I replied. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened the loan documentation app. I tapped once, then turned the screen to the crowd. The contract appeared in crisp black and white, with signatures, legal stamps, and a running balance. Would anyone like to see the documentation? It's quite thorough. Eric stepped closer and stared at the screen. His face turned white. "You're lying," Brianna said weakly. "You're just bitter." "No, dear," I said. "I'm just tired of being silent." I could have said more. A lot more. But I didn't need to. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. I tucked my phone back into my purse and gave the crowd one last smile. "Enjoy the party," I said. "I think I'll head home." And I walked out of my own retirement celebration, past the stunned faces, the untouched cake, the chandeliers glittering above a gathering that would never forget what had just happened. Outside, the valet brought my 15-year-old Honda around. I drove off with the windows down, letting the desert air fill the car. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, they would all know who I really was. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my small living room, that same space Brianna once called quaint with a smirk, and listened to the kind of silence that doesn't ask anything from you. No expectations, no disappointments. Just the sound of a clock ticking and the occasional creak of the old building settling into itself. I didn't feel angry. Not anymore. The hurt was still there, lingering beneath the surface like an old bruise you forget about until someone presses on it, but above that, rising stronger, was a sense of clarity. They had made a mistake. Not by insulting me. That had hurt, yes. But the real mistake was believing I had nothing left. That I had no cards to play, no power left to wield. They thought I was some irrelevant, fragile old woman. They forgot I was an accountant. At 7:04 a.m., my phone buzzed. Then again at 7:07. Then again. Eric. Then Brianna. Then an unknown number, probably Linda or Thomas. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, made myself a fresh cup of tea, and sat down at the table with a legal pad and a pen. Old habits. I didn't need the paper. I had apps, spreadsheets, encrypted files, but something about putting pen to paper felt grounding. Like I was writing the prologue to a new story, and this time, I wasn't the side character. I was the author. At 9 a.m. Sharp, I called Amanda Pierce. "Amanda, it's Nora Mitchell. I need to see you today, preferably before lunch." There was no hesitation. Amanda had been handling my legal affairs for over a decade. She knew I didn't make sudden demands unless something serious was happening. "Come in at 11, she said. "Bring everything you have. I'll be ready." Next, I called Victor Grant, my financial advisor and one of the few people on earth who understood the true scale of my assets. Victor was calm, brilliant, and as discreet as a locked vault. "I need a full audit," I told him. "Eric's financial connections, credit lines, co-signed loans, business holdings, indirect beneficiaries. I want to know exactly what strings I've been holding up." There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" "No," I said. "Something's finally right." After that, I changed clothes. Not into anything fancy, just a dark gray blazer, fitted slacks, and a pair of modest heels. My hair pulled back neatly, lipstick the color of dignity. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw her again. The version of me I'd buried under years of quiet sacrifice and false humility. At Amanda's office, we spread the documents out across the polished walnut conference table like a war map. She walked me through the terms of the loan. The Coles had signed everything willingly. There were notarized signatures, witness statements, and even an audio recording of our meeting standard procedure for a loan of that size, especially given the parties involved. I'd insisted on it. "They've made 6 payments, Amanda said, flipping to a transaction sheet. "Then nothing for over 2 years. "They've been living off it," I said. "The house, the cars, the vacation in Street Barts last year, all of it." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "You've been watching." "I always watch," I said. "I just don't always react." Then she pulled out something else. Something I hadn't known about. "A few months ago, Thomas and Linda submitted a preliminary inquiry to the probate court," she said slowly, laying a legal document in front of me. "They were asking about the process of contesting wills in cases where the testator may be deemed mentally unfit." I felt the air leave my lungs. "They're planning to say I've lost capacity." Amanda nodded. They're laying the groundwork to claim that when you issued the loan, you weren't of sound mind. If they can invalidate the contract, they may also try to control your estate. I stared at the document. I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was. Not because of the cold strategy, it was smart, in a disgusting way, but because they truly believed they could get away with it. I had underestimated their desperation, but they had underestimated mine. I want to schedule a neuropsych evaluation, I said, voluntarily. Cognitive, memory, psychological, the works. I want it done by the best clinic in Arizona, and I want everything documented. Full transparency. Amanda looked impressed. That's a strong move. I'm not giving them a single inch. Then I pulled a list from my purse. It was something I'd written that morning. Names, dates, amounts, projects. Every way I had financially propped up Eric over the past 15 years. This isn't just about protecting myself, I said. I'm withdrawing. Withdrawing? Amanda asked. From the game. From the enabling. From the illusion. I want to remove myself from any joint liabilities. I want to revoke any guarantees, close any secondary accounts. If Eric's business collapses, so be it. He needs to know what it feels like to build something on his own. Amanda didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded. I'll make it happen. When I left her office, I didn't feel vindicated. Not yet, but I did feel grounded. Like I was finally standing on the same earth I'd been holding up for everyone else. Victor called me later that afternoon. His voice was tense. Nora, I ran the audit. And? You've guaranteed over $600,000 in lines of credit tied to Eric's consulting firm. His revenue has been dropping steadily for over a year. His personal savings are nearly depleted. End quote. And his wife? She doesn't have independent income. Everything's been run through Eric's accounts or funneled from her parents. But get this, Thomas and Linda have refinanced their Sedona property twice. They're over-leveraged, and they've been using those funds to cover personal expenses. And ignoring me. They assumed you wouldn't come after them. They're about to learn otherwise. Victor hesitated. Nora, this could get ugly. I smiled. It already island. That evening, I declined every call again. I made myself dinner, rosemary chicken, and roasted potatoes, and poured a glass of wine. I sat at my kitchen table, not feeling bitter or angry, but resolute. They wanted a helpless old woman? They were about to meet someone else entirely. Someone who remembers every cent, every slight, every insult cloaked in faux concern. I looked out the window. The Scottsdale sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with orange and violet. Somewhere out there, Brianna was panicking. Thomas was probably yelling into a phone. Linda pacing the house in pearls and panic. And Eric? I didn't know, but I had a feeling he was starting to realize something. The person he thought he could overlook had just decided to stop saving him. By morning, I had a plan. And this time, the plan wasn't for Eric, or for Brianna, or for anyone else who had relied on me while pretending not to. It was for me. No more emotional blackmail dressed up as concern. No more quiet generosity being mistaken for weakness. I was done being the invisible support beam holding up a house that didn't want to acknowledge I was there. At 8 a.m. sharp, I walked into First Horizon Bank. I'd been a client there for over 20 years. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus and new money. Polished floors, fresh flowers on the marble counter. James Sinclair, the senior VP of lending, greeted me like I was royalty. He always had that smile, the kind reserved for rich people and public officials. Nora, what a pleasure. How's retirement treating you? I smiled back. It's been enlightening. He motioned me into his office, where sunlight streamed through tall windows and everything from his leather chair to his silver pen looked expensive. I placed a folder on his desk. I'm here to remove myself as guarantor from Eric Mitchell's business credit line. His smile faltered. That's a $750,000 facility, Nora. Your guarantee is what got it approved. If we remove it, you'll have to reassess, possibly restructure, maybe freeze it entirely. I finished for him. I understand. He leaned back slowly, studying me with a new kind of respect. Are you sure? I've never been more sure. He didn't ask why. Maybe he knew better. Or maybe he'd heard the whispers already. It'll take 48 hours to finalize, he said. I'll keep you informed. Thank you. End. I left with a strange calmness. Not joy, not vindication, just relief. My next stop was Victor Grant's office. He had been working through the night. When I arrived, his desk was covered in spreadsheets, portfolio reports, and client histories. I've already contacted Reynolds Capital and Bluestone Holdings, he said. They were both surprised, but very receptive. You built those relationships, Nora. You're the reason they've stayed with Eric this long. I want them back, I said plainly. Victor nodded. I'll transfer their contracts to Hastings Financial under your direct management. And what about West Point Solutions? He hesitated. They're a little trickier. The CEO's daughter is married to one of Eric's board members. It may take some finesse. Do what you can. If they stay with him, fine. If not, I'll make them an offer they can't refuse. Victor gave a soft chuckle. You're a different woman today. No, I corrected. I'm the same woman I've always been. I just stopped pretending I wasn't. Later that afternoon, the calls began. Eric first, then Brianna, then Eric again. Voicemail after voicemail, all variations of confusion, anger, and panic. Mom, what's going on? The bank just called. They said our credit line is under review. I just got an email from Reynolds Capital. They said you're taking over? What does that mean? What are you doing? I didn't answer. I went for a walk. Scottsdale was beautiful that time of year, warm without being oppressive. The desert sky was vast and endless, the air dry and clean. As I walked past the shops and cafes I used to only window shop in, I noticed something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not the kind that boasts or competes. The kind that stands quietly, steadily, on its own 2 feet. I passed by a boutique where a red cashmere scarf caught my eye. I went in, tried it on, and bought it without checking the price. Small act, big shift. I had spent so many years living modestly because I thought that's what good mothers did. Now I realized that was only true if the modesty was voluntary and not expected as proof of humility by those who needed to feel superior. That evening I made dinner. Nothing fancy, grilled salmon, some roasted vegetables. I ate slowly, enjoying every bite. Then I sat down with my notebook and began writing a new will. Not because I was dying, but because I was finally living with clarity. No more vague inheritance promises. No more unspoken expectations. I wrote names, numbers, contingencies, and I left space for changes. Because I didn't know yet who would earn their way back into my life, but I knew exactly who had forfeited that place, for now. The next morning, the fallout began in earnest. Victor called me at 9 a.m. sharp. Bluestone has officially signed with Hastings Financial. Reynolds will follow this afternoon. West Point is still in talks, but leaning in your direction. Without those 3, Eric's monthly revenue drops by 60%. Thank you, Victor. And the Wheelers? I smiled. They'll come next. By noon, Amanda called. We've received word from the Cole family's attorney. They're requesting a meeting. I laughed softly. I bet they are. Should I prepare a formal demand for repayment? Not yet. Let them sweat. Oh? Because now the game had changed. And for the first time in decades, I was playing to win. 3 days had passed since I pulled the plug on Eric's financial lifeline and reclaimed the clients who were never truly his. In those 72 hours, the silence from their end had been deafening. No calls. No messages. No confrontation. Until Amanda called. They want to meet, she said simply. I didn't ask who. I already knew. The Cole family doesn't beg in public. They orchestrate behind closed doors, in conference rooms and private lounges, behind frosted glass and security doors. That's where they feel safe. That's where they think they can control the story. So that's where I agreed to meet them. Amanda chose a neutral ground, one of those boutique law offices downtown with Scandinavian furniture and abstract art no one understands. Not their turf, not mine. Just a room with glass walls, a long gray table, and enough air conditioning to make you feel slightly vulnerable in your skin. I arrived 10 minutes early. Amanda was already seated, flipping through a binder of documents with quiet precision. She always carried herself like she was 5 steps ahead in a chess game no one else realized had begun. It comforted me. Across from us sat Thomas and Linda Cole. Linda's usual elegance was dimmed still in pearls, still tailored, but her blouse had a crease she hadn't noticed, and her hair, usually shellacked into perfection, had a few rebellious strands near her temple. Thomas wore a navy suit that had once been custom-fitted, but now hung a little loose at the shoulders. Stress had a way of trimming even the most self-assured. Then came Brianna. My daughter-in-law swept into the room as if on cue, shoulders rigid, mouth pressed into a thin line. Her heels clicked louder than necessary against the floor. She didn't look at me, just took her seat beside her mother, arms crossed tightly across her chest like a teenager being dragged to family therapy. Eric arrived last, and he looked worn. Eyes sunken, shirt untucked at the back, tie missing. His usual clean-shaven jaw was shadowed in stubble. He gave me a brief nod but said nothing as he sat beside Brianna. I almost didn't recognize him. This was the boy I raised, but not the man I thought he would become. Amanda broke the silence with her usual grace and steel. This meeting is informal and off the record. Mrs. Mitchell is here as a courtesy. But if it becomes clear that this conversation won't proceed in good faith, we'll terminate, and all further discussion will be handled through legal channels. Thomas chuckled dry, defensive. No need to start with threats. Amanda smiled without warmth. That wasn't a threat. That was a boundary. I turned to Linda. You asked for this meeting, so please, go ahead. She took a breath and leaned forward slightly, voice soft, rehearsed. Nora, there's been a lot of misunderstanding, emotion, frustration, but we're family. We've all made mistakes. Yes, I said calmly. Some more deliberately than others. Brianna shifted in her seat. We weren't trying to hurt you, Linda continued. We were trying to protect our daughter, our reputation. It wasn't personal. Then maybe that's the problem, I cut in. That you never saw me as a person, just a convenience, a wallet with a pulse. Thomas leaned forward now. Look, the economy has been brutal. Car sales are down. Inventory costs have doubled. The banks wouldn't touch us. We didn't know where else to turn. So you turned to me, I said. But not as a partner, not as a respected lender. Number? You turned to the harmless old bookkeeper who lived in a modest apartment and drove a Honda. You had the money, Thomas snapped. You just sat on it while we were drowning. No, I said. I sat on it while you were vacationing in Aspen and throwing $20,000 birthday parties for your dog. Brianna gasped, but said nothing. Amanda slid a folder across the table. This is the full loan agreement. Signed, notarized, witnessed. And this, she added, placing another sheet beside it, is the current balance due. With interest and penalties, the total repayment owed to Mrs. Mitchell is $2,843,712. Final notice will be served in 60 days. Failure to comply will result in a civil lawsuit and asset seizure. Linda paled. Thomas stared at the number like it might explode. Eric finally spoke. Mom, please. Don't do this. You don't need the money. This isn't about need, I said, keeping my voice even. It's about integrity. About not letting people walk all over me anymore just because I chose to live quietly. I'm your son, he said, quieter now. That means something. It did, I replied. Until you stood by while your wife called me pathetic in front of a room full of people. Until you let your in-laws plot to declare me mentally incompetent. His eyes widened. I didn't know they were doing that. Amanda raised an eyebrow. You signed an affidavit expressing concern about your mother's financial decisions and her living arrangements. That affidavit was attached to a guardianship inquiry filed 2 months ago. Eric looked stunned. He turned to Brianna. You told me it was just exploratory. Brianna flushed. It was. At first, but nothing, I interrupted. You were preparing to take control of my estate. The estate you didn't even know existed. You thought I had nothing. That made it easier, didn't it? No one spoke. I stood, slowly, deliberately. The way you do when you're done entertaining liars. You have 60 days to return what you owe me. Every penny. Thomas looked up at me. And if we can't? You will, I said. Or you'll lose everything trying to avoid it. Eric stood too. Wait, what about us? What about this family? I looked him in the eye. The boy I'd once stayed up all night with when he had chickenpox. The man who had let his wife humiliate me without blinking. That depends entirely on you, I said. Whether you can stop looking at me like a burden and start seeing me as a person. I turned and walked out. Amanda followed, calm as ever. She didn't need to say a word. We both knew. They were unraveling. The only question now was whether they would shatter quietly or try to drag me down with them. Outside, the heat of the Arizona sun felt like a second skin. I didn't flinch. I welcomed it. Because for the first time in decades, I wasn't shrinking to make others comfortable. I was standing in the full light of the truth. The morning after that meeting, Scottsdale felt different. It wasn't just the dry breeze or the buzz of tourists sipping iced lattes on patio cafes. It was something deeper, a shift in the atmosphere, like the universe had exhaled on my behalf. And for once, I was no longer holding my breath. I woke early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I brewed a pot of dark roast, opened the windows wide, and stood in the sunlight as it spilled across the hardwood floors of my modest apartment. It was the same place Brianna had once called cramped, quaint, and a bit depressing. But to me, it had never felt more like home. By 9 a.m., my phone was ringing. It was Victor. "They're unraveling," he said simply, without preamble. "Which part?" "All of it. Thomas and Linda contacted their broker this morning. They're trying to liquidate assets fast. Mutual funds, investment properties, even a few offshore accounts." I raised an eyebrow. "Offshore? Nothing illegal, just embarrassing if exposed." "Let them scramble," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "They had options. They chose this path." Victor hesitated. "There's more. A friend at Carrington Bank tipped me off. The Wheelers. Pardon me. The Coles are trying to refinance their Scottsdale property. Again. Third time this year. This time, they won't get approval. Their debt-to-income ratio is too high." I leaned back in my chair. "They thought I was bluffing." Victor chuckled. "They know better now." By lunchtime, Amanda called. "It's done. Formal notice of intent to sue has been delivered." "And their response?" "They haven't responded directly, but their attorney asked if we'd consider mediation. Quietly. Of course they did. Do you want to pursue that?" "Number. Let them feel the pressure." "Understood." By afternoon, the dominoes were falling faster than I expected. Eric's consulting firm lost its biggest client, Reynolds Capital. The very same client I had sent his way years ago. A client who had called me personally that morning to ask if I'd be willing to take them back under my personal management. I agreed. Another contract was suspended pending internal review. And then came the bank. They followed through. Eric's business credit line, $750,000, was frozen, pending reevaluation, which meant payroll would bounce within 2 weeks if he didn't find alternative funding. He called me 3 times that day. I didn't answer. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was clarity. The kind you earn after decades of giving without question. After watching your worth be measured by how invisible you can make yourself. After realizing that silence doesn't always mean peace, it sometimes means neglect. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down to sort through old photos. Not the digital kind, the real kind. Yellowed edges, handwritten dates on the back. Pictures of Eric in a stroller, of me and Robert painting the nursery, of birthdays with homemade cakes and paper hats. I wasn't nostalgic. I was reminding myself of the truth. I had done everything I could. No mother is perfect. I had made my share of mistakes. I worked too much. I kept secrets about money that I thought would protect Eric, only to create distance instead. But I had loved him fiercely, completely, unconditionally, until now. Because love, real love, doesn't mean enabling betrayal. My doorbell rang just after 8 p.m. It was unexpected. I opened it to find Eric standing there. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. The confidence, the bravado it had, all drained away. He wore a wrinkled dress shirt and khakis that didn't quite fit. No tie, no briefcase, just him, alone. "Hey, Mom." I didn't speak. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like he was entering a place he no longer felt entitled to. His eyes moved over the room, landing on the family photos I'd spread across the table. He didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch. Finally, he sat down across from me. I stayed standing. "I've lost almost everything," he said quietly. I said nothing. "My clients, my funding. Even Brianna's parents won't return my calls. They're panicking." "They should be." He nodded, not in defiance, but in agreement. I know I've failed you," he said, "and I'm sorry. Not just for what I did or didn't do, but for how long I let it happen. For the years I believed what Brianna said about you. For not asking questions. For choosing comfort over truth." Still, I said nothing. "You were never weak," he continued. "You were never pathetic. You were the strongest person in every room, and I didn't see it because I didn't want to. Because if you did," I said finally, "you would have had to confront what you became." His eyes filled, but he didn't cry. "I don't know how to fix this," he whispered. "You can't," I replied. "This isn't something a son can fix. It's something a man has to face." He looked up at me, eyes red. "Is it too late?" I paused. That pause felt like a lifetime. Then I walked to the table and picked up a photo of him at 7 years old, missing a front tooth, arms wrapped around my neck like I was his whole world. "Not if you're willing to start from here," I said, tapping the picture, "and work your way back." He nodded slowly. "Then I will." I didn't hug him. I didn't make promises. But I poured him a cup of tea, and we sat in silence. Not the kind that hides pain, the kind that makes room for healing. Outside, the world kept spinning. Inside, for the first time in years, I felt something stir again. Not trust, not yet, but possibility. 2 weeks passed. 14 days of silence, shifting, reckoning. In that time, I watched the curated little empire of my family begin to collapse. Not with one dramatic explosion, but slowly, like a house built on sand finally surrendering to the tide. I didn't rush in to stop it. When Eric laid off 3 of his employees, 2 of whom I had personally recommended to him years ago, I didn't offer advice or comfort. When Brianna shut down her influencer blog after her sponsors pulled out, citing reputational concerns, I didn't send her a kind message or a false reassurance. When Thomas and Linda listed their Sedona home for sale at a steep loss, I might add I didn't gloat or grieve. I simply noted it, folded the paper, and sipped my tea. They were living in the truth now. And the truth, like money, is only dangerous if you pretend it doesn't matter. Those 2 weeks weren't about revenge for me. They were about reclamation. I began to reclaim everything I'd put on hold for 35 years. My time, my focus, my voice. I cleaned out my closets, not out of spite, but because I realized I'd been holding on to clothing for a version of myself that no longer existed. Skirts I'd worn to silent fundraisers where I was invisible next to Brianna's designer gowns. Cardigans I'd brought to cold offices where I was the first to arrive and the last to leave. All of it went into bags and out the door. I opened the windows wider each morning, letting the Arizona sun fill my home, not because it was expensive or impressive, but because it was mine. Honest, unapologetic. And I worked. Hard. I worked. Not the way I used to, tucked into the shadows, making everything easier for others without credit or complaint. This time, I worked for me. Amanda had drawn up every legal protection I could ask for. Victor set the financial framework. Together, we launched a firm not in name only, but in identity. Mitchell Grant Advisors. A partnership. Equal. Victor would manage investments and high net worth portfolios. I would handle what truly mattered to me, helping women navigate legacy planning, guiding small business owners who had been overlooked by the big firms, showing families how to build generational wealth without selling their souls. And people came. They came quietly at first, through word of mouth, through whispers at the club, through emails that always began with, "I heard you might be someone I can trust." Then, they came openly. Retirees, single mothers, sons trying to untangle the mess their fathers left behind, daughters trying to keep the homes their mothers had worked their entire lives to pay off, business owners who were tired of being talked down to by men in blue suits who barely listened. They came to me, not the bookkeeper, not the sad little retiree with the old car. To me, Nora Mitchell, and I said yes to each of them with a quiet confidence that felt like sunlight warming a part of me that had gone cold. Eric, meanwhile, was sinking fast. He tried to pivot. I could see the movements in the business news. An attempted rebrand. A statement on his company website about new leadership principles. But the industry saw through it. His name had become synonymous with someone who had flown too high on borrowed wings. Brianna stopped posting altogether. The last image on her social feed was of a cappuccino at an overpriced brunch spot captioned, "Choose joy." The irony was so thick, I nearly laughed out loud when I saw it. Thomas and Linda sent a formal response through their lawyer, an offer to settle for a third of what they owed. Amanda didn't even blink when she rejected it. 60 days. That was the line. I could feel their desperation in every move they made. Selling assets, trying to hide funds, whispering to old allies to rally sympathy. But the tide had turned. No one was coming to save them. And I was finally done saving everyone but myself. One night, near the end of those 2 weeks, I sat on my small patio with a glass of wine and a pen in hand. I wrote a letter. Not to send, just to say what I hadn't said before. Dear Nora, you have always been enough, even when they couldn't see it, even when you let yourself forget it. You've carried generations on your back. You've built without glory. You've sacrificed without applause. But you are not invisible anymore. You are not small. You are not weak. You are not theirs. You are yours. Finally, I folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer beside my bed. Not as a reminder, but as a declaration. When the 60-day mark approached, Amanda handed me the envelope. "They've defaulted," she said. I didn't react right away. I just stared at the soft paper in my hands. Years of my life of kindness, of money, of silence had led to this moment. "Do we proceed?" she asked. I stood by the window and looked out at the desert sky. The sun was setting behind the red rocks, casting long golden rays across the cacti. "No," I said quietly. "Not yet." Amanda turned to me, curious. "I want to see who shows up," I said. "And how?" "Who?" I turned back to her. "The people who still matter. The ones who think there's something left to rebuild. Not with money, with truth." She nodded once. "And if no one does?" "Then I keep walking," I said. "But this time, I walk on my own 2 feet." She left without asking more. That night, I slept deeply. No regrets. No weight pressing on my chest. Just peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was finally becoming whole. The 61st day came like a whisper. No drama. No fireworks. No final warnings. Just a new morning. Quiet. Still. Unassuming. The sun poured in through my kitchen window like it always did, bouncing gently off the counters and warming the tile beneath my bare feet. The world outside didn't know or didn't care that a deadline had come and gone. But I did. And so did they. I didn't rush to check my email. I didn't sit by the phone. There was no anxiety in me anymore, only certainty. I made French toast that morning just the way Eric used to like it when he was a boy, with cinnamon and powdered sugar and strawberries on the side. I brewed fresh coffee and let Ella Fitzgerald play softly from the kitchen speaker. It was the kind of morning I used to make for everyone else. Now, I made it for me. At 9:13 a.m., Amanda texted. No payment received. I looked at the message. I didn't flinch. I simply replied, "Noted." No apology had come. No last-minute deposit. No letter of regret. They had made their choice. They had chosen pride over accountability, image over truth, silence over reconciliation. And pride, I had learned, always comes with a cost. By noon, Amanda had filed the official lawsuit with the court. The documents were clean, precise, undeniable. Thomas and Linda Cole were now publicly listed as defendants in a civil case that would shine a harsh light on every financial string they had pulled and every lie they had told to keep the mask in place. The local papers would pick it up soon. The ones that had once printed photos of them at charity galas and fundraisers would now run headlines about unpaid loans and fraudulent influence. But I didn't care about scandal. I didn't care about gossip. This wasn't about revenge. This was about precedent. It was about restoring a boundary that should never have been crossed in the first place. That afternoon passed quietly. I took a walk through the botanical gardens, let the warmth of the desert sun kiss my skin, and bought myself a small cactus in a terracotta pot. I named her Ruth, because Ruth, like me, had learned to thrive in dry places. Around 7 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Eric. "Can I come in?" There was no begging, no drama, just those 5 words. I opened the door. He looked different. Not just tired, but stripped of the layers he'd worn for years. The arrogance, the defensiveness, the constant need to prove something. All of it had been burned away, and what remained was just in him. He stepped inside, quietly, like someone entering a place he no longer knew if he belonged in. He glanced around the apartment, the same one he used to mock. Now, he didn't say a word about the furniture or the space. He just took a seat at the kitchen table, like a man sitting in front of a truth too large to escape. "I know," he said after a moment, "that it's done." I nodded. They didn't pay. They probably never intended to. I stayed silent. They're unraveling, selling everything they can, hiding what's left. They blame you. I looked him in the eye. Of course they do. It's easier than blaming themselves. He exhaled. "I've been reading everything. The documents, the contracts, the emails you sent me over the years. I even called Marcus." I tilted my head. "And what did you learn?" His voice broke slightly. "That I was blind, that you built everything I stood on, and I never thanked you. I never even saw you." He paused. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it yet." I listened. "I'm here because I want to rebuild something. Not the money, not the business, not the image. Just maybe a relationship. Something real, something honest, in me." His voice wavered. "Not for Brianna, not for Emma, for me." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I got up, walked to a drawer, and pulled out an old photo. Him, age 6, arms around my neck, frosting on his cheek. Pure joy. I handed it to him. "If you want to rebuild," I said gently, "you'll need to start from here. From who you were, before the world told you that success meant power. Before you forgot who you really were." He held the photo, tears silently falling down his cheeks. "I'm willing," he whispered. This time, I didn't promise him anything. I didn't rescue him. I didn't tell him it would all be okay. But I did pour him a cup of tea, and I sat down across from him, not as a mother trying to fix a broken child, but as a woman finally whole, willing to see if the broken pieces of a family might still find a way to fit. Eric didn't leave that night. He stayed, wordless, in the silence he had created over years of missteps and absence. I didn't offer comfort. I offered space. Sometimes, that's the most merciful thing you can give someone who's finally beginning to see their reflection clearly. He slept on the old blue couch, the one that slouched in the middle, the one he once joked smelled like divorced librarian. I gave him a blanket and a glass of water. I didn't ask him if he wanted anything else. If he needed something, he'd have to ask. I wasn't in the business of guessing anymore. Morning came soft and gray. I was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee with a familiar rhythm. Cinnamon and bitter grounds, a comfort blend. Around 7:45, he shuffled in, barefoot and rumpled, like a man who had wrestled all night with truths too sharp to sleep beside. "Smells like the 90 seconds in here," he muttered. "That's just cinnamon." We drank in silence, not the uncomfortable kind, the kind where things settle, unspoken but understood. He didn't apologize, not yet. I didn't ask him to. Words meant less than the fact that he'd stayed. "I want to fix things," he said at last. "Not just with you, with myself. That's a good place to start." He stayed 3 days. We didn't talk about the coals, not about the lawsuit, not about Brianna or the mountain of small betrayals that had led us here. Those things were wreckage. These quiet mornings, the absence of judgment, this was what came after the collapse, the clearing of rubble, the start of something else. On the 3rd day, as he packed his bag, he paused in the doorway and looked back. "You were always the strong one, weren't you?" I looked up from my tea. Number I just ran out of ways to be small. He nodded slowly. There was a tightness in his jaw, like he was holding something in, maybe gratitude, maybe shame. He hugged me not like a man trying to earn forgiveness, but like a man finally understanding what it costs to lose your place in someone's heart. When he left, I didn't cry. I stood in the doorway and watched his car disappear down the street, wondering if maybe, just maybe, something in him had come home too. The day after Eric's visit, the house settled into a peculiar silence. Not the tense, fearful hush it once had at gatherings. Instead, it felt like a breath a moment stretched between what was broken and what might be rebuilt. I found myself restless. Old habits died hard. My hands itched for purpose. So I leaned into the next morning with intention. I signed up for that painting class I'd mentioned, watercolors, on Tuesday evenings. I drove to the little art studio before dawn, paper and brush in hand. The instructor greeted me kindly, without familiarity. I felt seen only for who I was in that moment. Someone beginning again. I dipped my brush into pale ochre and felt a glow I hadn't known came from creativity, not control. Later that afternoon, I came across my old notebook, one I had used over the years, to record clients' needs, tax strategies, deadlines. I casually flipped through it and found a page labeled, "For Later." It was a list of personal goals. Write that novel. Plan a trip to Tuscany. Learn Italian. Tuscany, I whispered. So, I ordered flashcards. Italian numbers. I practiced pronunciation aloud. Uno, due, tre. The words sounded strange and new. And that was okay. I began exploring independently again, antique bookstores where every worn spine smelled like possibility, tiny cafes in back streets where no one asked if I was retired or needy. I even agreed to a casual meetup with a neighbor, a man named Martin, an architect who had admired my skyline building modifications some decades ago. He listened intently to my stories, didn't interrupt, didn't offer help I didn't ask for. I felt recognized. Brianna texted once, a cute picture of Emma napping in a floral onesie. No words of apology, just that single image. I didn't respond. Instead, I stared at it and imagined Emma's future. That evening, I was walking home under soft streetlights when I saw Eric sitting on the stoop outside my building. His shoulders were squared, but quiet. He gave me that look, not awkward, not expectant, but serious, hopeful. I didn't want to barge in, he said quietly. I paused, then unlocked the door. We spoke in person for the first time, without accusations or pressure. I've started therapy, he said, working through everything. I was blind. I didn't know how much I'd let go, how much I'd given away. I nodded, settled on the couch with a cup of tea. I want honesty, he continued. Not just between us, but with myself. I need to rebuild for Emma, for me. I studied him. The desperation was fading. A different kind of strength was growing. It was harder and rarer than any facade. Start with that, I told him. Let life teach you again. And so began our reintroduction. We spent hours talking not about lawsuits or the Coles meltdown, but about grief, pride, and what it meant to be real. He'd admit the ways he'd copied behaviors that felt safe but hollow. I'd share how loneliness had once made me smaller than I was. One night, he landed on something, and it broke the dam. I don't know how to trust again, he admitted, voice raw. I put a hand on his arm. You start with yourself. Others come once you learn to stand. That was the promise of unsettling peace. It doesn't bring instant calm. It brings space to grow. Weeks passed. I continued painting. I practiced Italian by repeating La vita è bella over and over, until my accent didn't feel like a lie anymore. Eric's progress was incremental. A phone call where he thanked me for believing in him. A visit where he didn't ask for anything. He sat with me and helped prune my potted plants, no agenda, just shared effort. One afternoon, Brianna showed up. She knocked, awkward and uncertain, holding Emma. She entered quietly. Her wedding dress was long gone from her closet. The expensive airs were gone too. She's your granddaughter, she said, voice shaky. I stepped aside. Yes. They stayed for tea. I asked about Emma's schedule. She nodded, thankful, slightly afraid. I didn't say I forgive you. But I didn't say, Stay away. The silence carried more than words. Days turned into months. The lawsuit dragged forward, but it had become background noise. I focused on forward motion. Mitchell Grant Advisors grew. I mentored young entrepreneurs, planned legacies, coached people who'd been told they didn't belong. I still lived simply, but not because I had to. I chose that simplicity now. Late one night, I sat in my kitchen, reading Italian poetry by candlelight. The scent of vaniglia drifted from the candle. I smiled. The peace I felt wasn't perfect. It was unsettling, like standing on the edge of a cliff with a clear sky stretching forever. You could fly, you could fall, but you weren't afraid anymore. And that was enough. The courthouse smelled like old books and polished floors. That mix of history and sterility, like justice itself, was an old suit worn but still trying to impress. I walked in alone. No assistant. No lawyer beside me. Amanda was already inside, waiting with her folders and quiet fire. But I didn't need anyone to walk me through those doors. Not today. Outside, it was a crisp morning in Arizona. The kind of day that fools you into thinking the desert is gentle. Inside, the chill was real, the kind that lived in marble walls and echoed off quiet footsteps. The case had been scheduled weeks ago. And yet, as I took my seat near the front of the courtroom, it all felt sudden. Final. Like the last page of a chapter I'd been too afraid to close. I spotted Eric first. He was seated halfway back, suit slightly wrinkled, fingers locked together so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. He saw me. We exchanged a nod, neither warm nor cold, just real, present. Brianna wasn't with him. Thomas and Linda Cole were already there, seated with their attorney. Linda wore dark sunglasses, though we were indoors. Thomas had that tight-jawed look of a man who still thought he could talk his way out of anything. Neither looked my way. The judge entered. We stood, and just like that, everything I had carried for years was placed on the record. Amanda stood first, laying out the case with the calm confidence I had always admired in her. She didn't dramatize. She simply unfolded the story, how I had loaned $2 million to the Coles at their request, how the terms had been written fairly and agreed upon, how payments had stopped with no explanation. She presented the documents, the emails, the promissory note. Then came the part that still stung. How, after I requested repayment, the Coles had sought to have me declared mentally unfit. How they'd drafted a petition for guardianship, citing my emotional instability and confused memory. How their daughter-in-law, Brianna, had supported the claim. There was a long silence in the courtroom after that. The judge looked down at the papers, then at me. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, "would you like to speak?" I stood. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't quiver. I had said these words in my head for so long they had become part of me. "I am not here for revenge," I said clearly. "I am here because I believe in consequences. I gave money in good faith. I gave it quietly, with trust, because these were people I considered family. And they used that trust as a weapon." I turned slightly, not to face the Coles, but to face the courtroom. What they did to me wasn't just financial. It was personal. They tried to erase my credibility, my independence, my history, not because I was weak, but because I was strong enough to say no. Amanda nodded subtly behind her glasses. The Coles lawyer rose. He asked the court for leniency, spoke of misunderstanding and intent to repay. He argued that public litigation would damage the Cole family's reputation. I wanted to laugh. Damage had already been done, but not by me. The judge asked one question. "Has any payment been made toward the loan in the past 6 months?" Amanda answered, "No, Your Honor." The judge looked at Thomas and Linda. Then she ruled. The court found in my favor. The Coles were ordered to repay the full amount, including accrued interest and legal fees. Assets would be liquidated as necessary. The judgment was final. I felt no triumph, only release. As I stood to leave, Linda finally looked up at me. Her expression was unreadable, too many masks to tell which was real. Thomas stared straight ahead. Eric met me in the hallway. He looked as though he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Mom," he said, "I don't have the right words." "And you don't need words," I said. "You need time." He nodded. Brianna wanted to come. I told her not to. That was wise. She's been seeing someone. A therapist. We all should, I said, softer than I intended. She sent this, he said, and handed me an envelope. I didn't open it right away. I slipped it into my purse. Do you hate her? He asked. I paused. I don't know, I said truthfully. But I don't hate Emma. At that, his eyes filled. He reached for me. Not to beg. Not to apologize. Just to hold my hand. We stood like that for a long time. When I got home that afternoon, I opened Brianna's envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten. The kind of shaky handwriting that betrayed its effort. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It told the truth. About the pressures of status. About watching her parents manipulate people for years and never questioning it. About falling in love with a man who made her believe money was the only measure of safety. About her jealousy of me. You loved with nothing expected in return, she wrote, and I never knew how to receive that. At the bottom of the letter was a photograph. Emma, holding a small toy, wearing a dress that looked handmade. The caption, scribbled beneath in Brianna's script, read, "She knows your name. She says it when she sees birds." I sat there, holding that letter, and wept. Not for Brianna, not even for Eric, but for the girl I had once been young, driven, kind, and for the older woman I had become, who had given so much and finally, received something honest in return. It began with the clatter of mail through the slot, a soft thud on the hardwood floor. I didn't expect anything else that Sunday morning, just the usual Sunday silence that blankets a quiet house, as comforting as an old quilt. But moments later, there was a knock. Not impatient, not hurried, gentle, quieter than I remembered from decades past. I set aside my tea, wiped my hands on a towel, and padded to the door. The chatter of morning talk radio sifted through the living room. The air smelled of citrus from the cleaning spray I used the night before. I took a breath and opened it. There stood Eric. He looked like a man who got his footing back just enough to stand tall, but his shoulders still carried the weight of what had passed between us. His eyes met mine, not pleading, not defiant, just present. In his arms was Emma. She wore a soft yellow cardigan, her hair tied in a floss-thin ponytail. A stuffed owl drooped gently from one small hand. She blinked at the sudden light, then at me, and something in her small face lit up like she was recognizing not just a face, but something more elemental and comforting. "Hi, Nana," she said, and the quiet snapped inside me. I didn't move. The world felt unexpectedly still. Eric cleared his throat. "She's been saying your name for a while now. Thought, maybe, today was the day." The words tumbled gently, carried by hope and fragility. I knelt, inhaled Emma's fresh scent apples and baby lotion, felt the warmth of her hands on my cheeks. Without thinking, I gathered her into my arms, and she melted in, settling like she had every right to be there. Inside the house, the light shifted. Sunbeams danced across the floor, as if dust motes were celebrating a long-awaited reunion. We crossed into the living room. Emma toddled ahead, touching the covers of books, curiously tracing the edge of the coffee table, tapping on an old ceramic cactus I once named Ruthie. She cracked a tiny grin, and I realized this moment, right here, was worth more than any restitution or courtroom victory. Eric watched quietly from the doorway. I caught his eye, his jaw clenched, and a single tear gleamed at the corner. He nodded once, then stepped back, giving us space. Emma came back to me and peeked up. "Nana, paint?" she asked in toddler enthusiasm. My breath lodged. My watercolor set a dusty tray of half-dried pigments sat in a drawer I hadn't opened in months. The old brushes mirrored my own abstention from beauty, from creation. But, yes, we would paint. I got the set up a paper on the coffee table. Emma's eyes widened. "Pink, yellow, blue." She pointed. "Pink," she declared, and dabbed a finger in the magenta and smeared it across the paper. We painted together. Not a single neat shape. Just joyful strokes, zigzags, splashes. Emma hummed softly, not caring if the colors mixed or if the lines were sloppy. She leaned on me, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't think about appearances or judgments. I just leaned back. Eric came in with a plate of soft pancakes, just like the ones he used to wake up to on Saturday mornings. We ate breakfast in peace as Emma showed me her 2 favorite feathers she'd collected earlier from the garden. She said things like, "Nana, I love you," and my heart pinched with the kind of ache that brings both joy and loss. We spent the rest of the morning in a comfortable bubble. I read her a story. She snuggled under a blanket I knitted years ago. Eric and I didn't need to talk about the lawsuit, the betrayal, the legal fallout. Those were the ruins behind us. This was the quietly unfolding life ahead. Later, as the sun shifted golden across the room, Eric picked Emma up. She turned to me, her gaze steady, and said, "Paint again later?" I nodded. "Another day, sweetheart." He gave me a measured look, something like relief mixed with guilt and hope swirling in one glance. When they left, I closed the door softly, tiptoed to the painting we'd done, the funny blobs of color, Emma's handprint barely visible in blue. I sat across from it on the chair I used to feel invisible in. But today, I felt seen, heard, needed. I realized forgiveness isn't a dramatic act, it's a quiet one. The kind that begins when a small child calls you Nana with perfect innocence, and you let yourself be called that for as long as you can hold on to it. I cleaned the brushes afterward, not because I had to, but because it felt meaningful. The house felt warmer, full of possibility. I lit a candle, a small blaze of vanilla-scented flame. I didn't say a prayer. I didn't plan the next step. I just listened to the silence, heard a child's laughter reverberate long after the door closed. Some stories are told out loud. Others arrive folded in envelopes, sealed with silence, and written in ink that bleeds between the lines. It began a few weeks after Emma's visit. I had just returned from the market, my bag filled with apples, a wedge of sharp cheddar, and a bouquet of sunflowers more out of habit than extravagance. When I opened my mailbox, there it was. A pale blue envelope, handwritten, familiar in its softness. I paused in my kitchen, hands still cold from the chilled morning air, and opened it. The letter was from Brianna. Her handwriting had always been graceful, looping letters with just enough imperfection to reveal effort. There were no greetings, no pleasantries. She began with what mattered. "I've been writing to you for weeks, tearing up every draft. I don't know if you'll ever read this one, but it feels like the closest I've come to honesty." That sentence alone made my fingers tighten. She wrote about guilt, not in a way that begged for sympathy, but in the way of someone who had finally stopped lying to herself. When I stood behind my parents, I thought I was protecting my family. I realize now I was protecting a version of myself I didn't want to lose, one who depended on money, perception, and power. You didn't just threaten that, you exposed it. She admitted to being afraid of me, my independence, my clarity, my refusal to fold. "I thought women like you were dangerous because you couldn't be controlled. Now I know you were just free, and I've never been that before." She talked about therapy, about late nights feeding Emma, staring at old photographs of Eric when he was young, when his smile hadn't yet learned how to hide. She included a drawing. Emma made a swirl of purple and green, with the word Nana scrawled across the top. I traced it with my thumb. Brianna's final paragraph caught in my chest. "I know I don't deserve a relationship with you. I don't expect it. But I want Emma to grow up knowing the kind of woman you are. Not the rumors, not the anger, just the truth. If you ever decide to speak to me, I'll be here. If not, I'll still tell her your story." I folded the letter slowly. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was movement, a bridge not yet crossed, but built. The next morning, I began a letter of my own. "Dear Brianna, I don't have the words either, not yet. But I read yours, and that's a start." I wrote nothing more, just signed my name. I didn't need to explain. She'd know. I slipped it into an envelope and placed it in the mailbox. Then I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the clouds drifting across the Arizona sky, and allowed the weight I'd carried for so long to settle into something lighter. Weeks passed, and more letters came. Not many, but enough. Emma would scribble drawings, and Eric would write little updates about kindergarten enrollment, about her new obsession with ladybugs, about how she now refused to eat anything green unless it was cut into a star shape. One letter included a photo. Emma asleep, hugging a framed photo of me. Eric's caption underneath read, "She calls this your hug picture." I cried that night, not out of grief, but release. And I began writing back. Long letters, some full of memories, others with advice. Sometimes just a single line. Tell her Nana is always near, even when she's not in the room. Brianna never wrote back again. Not directly. But one day, a package arrived. Inside it, a book. Hardcover, well read. The gift of an ordinary day. Tucked inside the front cover was a note in Brianna's script. This book reminded me of the life I used to fear. Now, it's the one I want. I kept it on my nightstand. Still do. By spring, Emma visited every other weekend. We painted. We read stories. I taught her how to press flowers between wax paper and slip them into books. She called it petal magic. One afternoon, as we walked through the community garden together, Emma looked up and asked, "Nana, were you sad before I came?" I paused, then nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, I was." She took my hand. "It's okay. I came now." That night, I added one more line to my journal. Forgiveness is not a transaction, it's a practice. And sometimes, it arrives in the shape of a little girl's hand. By early July, the summer stretch felt endless and full of promise. The desert heat had given way to more temperate mornings, crisp enough for a sweater at dawn, warm enough for light dinners on the back patio. It was the kind of weather that made you believe in second chances, in new gatherings under open skies. Eric called one evening. "What would you think about coming to the house next weekend? All of us. Emma, Brianna. Only if you're ready." I didn't hesitate. A week later, I packed a small overnight bag. Inside, layered clothes for shifting temperatures, a handful of paperbacks, my paintbrush kit, and a cookbook of easy summer meals. I wanted simple things, honest gestures. Eric's summer house was nestled along a quiet lake edge, just a couple of hours' drive from Scottsdale. The kind of place with screened porches, wooden swings, and the scent of pine mingling with water. When I arrived, the sight of it took my breath. I hadn't expected it to feel so real: sunlight, dancing on the boardwalk over moonlit waves, Eric stringing lights over the patio, Emma splashing barefoot by the dock. Brianna sat on the porch swing, gently rocking, Emma in her lap, humming the refrain to some nursery rhyme. I approached slowly, unsure of how to step into this patched world. But in that moment, I realized something. This house, like me, had space for both the heartbreak and the healing. I greeted them. Brianna stood. Her eyes were warm. Not empty, but sincere. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know this isn't easy." I nodded. "The meal's almost ready. I made your favorite grilled fish tacos and mango salsa." I allowed myself to smile. Small acts had become everything. Dinner unfolded under fairy lights. Conversation was quiet, but not forced. Emma chased fireflies. Eric told stories of his new consulting gig. Brianna asked about the watercolor class. We passed plates, passed stories, passed forgiveness without saying the word. Later, as darkness settled, we wandered to the dock. The lake reflected glittering stars, like a second sky beneath our feet. Brianna stood beside me, arms crossed loosely. "I want you to know I'm trying," she said quietly. I turned toward her. "You don't have to say more," I replied. "Just being here means more than words." We stood there, boundaries still present, but softer now. In the days that followed, we found rhythms without planning them. I taught Emma how to press a flower between 2 sheets of wax paper. Eric and I walked the dusty trails behind the house, talking about business and life. Brianna and I cooked breakfast together in the farmhouse-style kitchen, peeling fruit, humming to the radio. At sunset, we laughed together over spilled wine and mosquito bites. On the third evening, a storm blew in. We crammed inside the living room, knees almost touching, as rain battered the windows and wind rattled the shutters. We huddled there, no one speaking at first. Then, Emma, sleepy-eyed, leaned against me and whispered, "Home." None of us reacted immediately. That single word, small, unassuming, carried more meaning than any apology or gesture could. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Brianna's letter. Gently, I handed it to her. She sat next to me, reading. When she finished, she didn't cry or ask forgiveness. She just laid her head on my shoulder. And we sat there, together, while the storm raged outside and the house held us safe. We spent the rest of the weekend gradually returning to that summer home beneath blue skies. When it was time to leave, Emma gave me a drawing, a multicolored house with stick figures on the porch. Above, in childish script, family. I cried then. Not tears of pain, tears of possibility. That drive home felt different. The road unspooled before me, not as a reminder of solitude, but as a promise. The journey doesn't end. It only changes direction when we have the courage to stay. The weekend at the summer house had shifted everything. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was enough a crack in the wall through which light began to flow. We drove home through the dusky desert, the sky a canvas of dusk-colored strokes. I sat in the back seat beside Emma, her head resting on my shoulder, both of us watching the world pass in silence. Eric drove, his hands firm on the wheel. Before we parted at the front door, I realized something had changed. Something inside us, all of us, had softened just enough to hope. The following Tuesday night, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside, a letter from Eric. "Mom, I'm in therapy. I said it before, but I want to do more than say it. I want to become someone you can be proud of, someone Emma can respect and learn from. That won't happen in a day, but every day I try to be a little better. Thank you for holding space for me, even when I didn't think I deserved it." His words weren't grand, but they were honest, and that mattered more than any apology. 2 weeks later, Brianna called. "Would you come by tomorrow night? Just the three of us, and Emma. I'd like to try cooking something." I agreed. The next evening, I crossed the threshold into the home that so many memories held. Dinner was simple: grilled vegetables, a salad bursting with basil, and rice scented with saffron. Emma brought me flowers. She picked herself little blue cornflowers that nodded from spaghetti jars. We ate around the kitchen island. Brianna and Eric spoke quietly. They spoke about bills and about the changes they were making, about selling the house, downsizing, about Emma's preschool fund, about forgiveness, though they never named it. After dinner, Emma begged for a story. I tucked her in and read her a picture book about stars and faraway places. When Emma was asleep, Brianna stayed behind. I looked at her, at the woman who had once called me bitter, who had conspired to invalidate my autonomy. The anger didn't vanish, but grief had already done much of the work of softening it. "I'm sorry," she said slowly, "for everything." I took a breath. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." We didn't hug, not yet, but the distance between us felt smaller. As I turned to leave, Brianna whispered, "I wrote something for you." She handed me a folded paper. On it was a single sentence: "I hope we can start again, not because the past doesn't hurt, but because we deserve to try." I nodded. Tears blurred my vision. I nodded again until the words felt right, until I believed I could say them, too. That night, after I'd crawled into bed, I wrote in my journal, "Reconciliation isn't finishing, it's continuing together. It's the courage to rebuild when the rubble of hurt still smokes. And it is, quietly, the most powerful thing we can build." Months passed. Emma grew more confident, linking hands with both Nana and Mama. We reunited for holidays and birthdays. I hosted a 4th of July barbecue in my small apartment, Eric grilling burgers on my tiny balcony, laughter spilling across mismatched chairs. Brianna and I formed a quiet ritual: Sunday coffee and shared memories. Eric and I had regular walks, no expectations, just time. One evening, they surprised me at my door. They arrived with takeout, and Brianna wore the same serene expression she'd worn when we reconciled. We sat in my living room, flowers on the table, art supplies at one end, family pictures assembled on the wall. We didn't talk about money or lawsuits. Not once. We talked about the sunrise, about Emma's school play, about memories of Eric as a child. We built trust again, one quiet evening, one shared laugh, one small kindness after another. By now, I know reconciliation doesn't erase ego or pain, but it reclaims something far more precious: the shared heart, the daring of connection after fracture. And in that, we found something real. The day we turned the page quietly, without fuss or ceremony, Felt like the end of a long, trembling chapter and also the beginning of something tender, guarded, but real. It was a Thursday morning. The light in my apartment was soft, filtered through pale curtains. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of mint tea warming my palms, as Emma splashed her paint across watercolors with the unabashed joy only a child can muster. Eric was in the living room. Fixing a loose wire in the lamp, he sighed, not in frustration, but in familiarity. The routine smallness of it felt colossal. Brianna emerged, carrying a tray of honey, cornbread, and seasonal fruit. She passed me a slice with a cautious smile. I took it, tasting more than sweetness, a paused gesture toward peace. "Good?" she asked. "It's lovely," I said. Just like this moment. We shared breakfast in silence that was comfortable, not filled with awkwardness or expectation, but something like gratitude extended without fanfare. Emma's giggles echoed through the rooms. At one point, she marched over, held out her paint-splattered hand, and asked, "Paint again, Nana?" I looked at Brianna. She nodded. I smiled and took Emma's hand. "Yes, sweetheart. Let's paint again." After breakfast, Brianna watched me guide Emma in blending delicate yellows and soft greens. Eric sat close by, flipping through an old notebook filled with sketches I'd made years ago, simple line drawings from a time before quiet grief became so habitual. He closed it gently and looked up. "You've always been the heart of this family." I blinked back tears I didn't expect. The ordinary magic was how quickly these moments accumulated unremarkable decisions like making tea, drawing together, repairing a lamp, each one weaving our broken threads into new strength. Later, I sat on my balcony with a journal in my lap. The sky bloomed into midday heat. I wrote my final lines, not as a summary, but as a tender acknowledgement. Here we are, not perfect, still healing, yet present. The real miracle isn't that everything is fixed. It's that we choose, over and over, to remain. I closed the journal and looked inside at a stack of other pages, the stories of a lifetime I'd never shared. I knew I could write them someday, but not now. Not yet. The story of us felt good enough when it ended with paint-smeared hands and gentle forgiveness. I stood and brought my journal inside. In the living room, Emma sat coloring inside a half-finished card she had made for me. "Happy Grandma Day," it read, although we hadn't celebrated the day quite yet. Even the mistake felt like a gift. I sat beside her, took her hand, and she leaned in to show me where she'd drawn 2 hearts, one peach, one green. I kissed her head. Then I looked around at my son, at my daughter-in-law, at the messy cornbread plate, at the stack of watercolor paper. No perfect closure, but harmony. We left the card on the fireplace mantel. In that quiet space, a home rebuilt on truth rather than pretense, I finally felt free. Not untouchable, just fully alive again. And that, after all the chapters, was everything. What did you feel while listening to this story all the way through? If it touched your heart, leave the number 1 inch the comments. If you didn't feel connected to it, feel free to write 0. Every piece of feedback means a lot to me, because it's thanks to you that I can keep going. It's from your responses that I draw the energy to tell the next chapter. A new story is coming, even deeper, even more moving, and I truly hope you'll be there to listen with me.